All right, guys, welcome everyone to our spring symposium on the topic of movement-based play therapy interventions with Dr. Robert Grant. We are very excited for him to be here today. So I'm going to briefly introduce you to him and then I'll pass it off. So Dr. Grant is a licensed professional counselor, national certified counselor, and a registered play therapist supervisor. Grant is also the creator of Odd Play Therapy, which is an integrative family play therapy framework designed to address the mental health needs of neurodivergent children and adolescents. Grant is a supervisor, consultant, life coach, and multi-published author who has used his several years of advancing training and his own lived neurodivergent experience to provide affirming services to children and families. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Grant.
Thank you, Sadie and Michael and everybody for being here today. I'm excited to be able to share with you and provide this training information. Just a couple of notes before we jump into our training. One, we will be together about 2 hours, and so we will try to take a short break kind of in the middle there, like a 5 to 7 minute break just to get up and get away and have a break, and then we'll come back together. As we go through these 2 hours, we are offering CE hours for this from the Association for Play Therapy for people who are interested in that, and also National Board for Certified Counselors. So they do have a couple of rules for us. One is, the main one, is that you need to keep your camera on at all time for a live webinar CE certificate. And then two, there is a post exam. Boo, we don't particularly like that one, but there is a post exam. I think it's only 12 questions, and you'll get that at the end along with the training evaluation. So you'll just need to complete those documents when we're done in order to get your certificate as well. Okay, so thanks for that introduction. If you want to learn more about my bio, it's all on my website, and you can go there and read that. And then if you have any questions about it, you can let me know. We are talking about this topic, movement-based play therapy. We're really going to talk a lot about interventions that are movement-based and talk about a lot, do some together, so you can get a sense of how you can use these in the work that you're doing with the clients that you're seeing. And before we jump into those interventions, we are just going to talk a little bit more about philosophy of movement, and especially in child therapy situations and processes. For questions, we are kind of on the larger side as a group. So I think kind of maybe before we take our first break, and then at the end, we'll just have some time for question and answer. So if you do think of a question that comes up for you, make sure you write it down, put it in the chat. And then when we get to that Q&A time, we'll stop and make sure that we try to answer as many questions as I can. So your first few slides I'm blazing through because it's just technical stuff. You can read it on your own. My disclosures are here, the learning objectives, all those things that are important to have in there, but you can read those on your own and let me know if you have any questions about anything. Because I want to jump right into our topic, because I know these 2 hours will go by fast for me and for the content. And I want to try to make sure I get through all of our content. So this all started for me as a very young therapist and play therapist. I was actually just getting started in attending play therapy trainings going to work toward getting my registered play therapist status. And I was in this training, and the trainer introduced this book and this program called Brain Gym. So some of you may already know what Brain Gym is. We're going to talk about it a little bit more later in the training, but it's a exercise movement program that focuses on these 27 exercises that cross the midline that you can do with kids, that all involve like physical movement that cross the right and left hemispheres of the brain for that whole brain activation benefit. So this trainer introduced this, and it's something we could use in play therapy. And I just thought was really interesting, really fascinated me. So I looked more into that program and just started learning more about movement focused play or movement focused interventions to help with different mental health needs. And so that's been just a part of my learning, a part of my implementation with clients ever since that training, is doing more and more of this. And for many kids, it's very beneficial. We're going to talk about, maybe the exceptions, right? When maybe we wouldn't do any kind of movement interventions or movement focused play therapy or child therapy. But for the most part, there's a lot of kids who could certainly benefit from this. So let's start with just kind of defining what we're talking about a little bit better. So physical activity is like a really broad kind of definition. It's pretty much any body movement that requires any level of energy expenditure. I mean, what I just did right here would fall under the category of physical movement, what I just did with my hand. So physical movement is just anything like that. Any movement of the body that requires energy expenditure. This could even be you just laying down on the bed and kicking one foot up. You are exerting physical activity, right? It may not be a high level of physical activity, but it's still physical activity. So that's sort of a big sort of general idea of movement. And then we have exercise, which is a specific type of physical activity. It tends to, by definition, be more planned, structured, or repetitive for a specific purpose, usually to improve or maintain physical fitness or heart health, or some reason that you're engaging in a particular exercise. And it has this more purposeful, planned quality to it. Physical play can include all kinds of physical movements and expenditure of energy of children, but is usually done in a way that speaks to the child's play languages, preferences. Sometimes this can actually be done non-directive, where the child is doing this on their own. Think kids who run out on a playground on a recess break and whatever kind of physical play they might get involved in, or go outside maybe in their neighborhood and get involved in some kind of physical play. Non-directive, going to their interests, what feels good to them, kind of physical play. You can also have physical play that's dictated by an adult, that's directed by an adult, like maybe a game that's played in PE class or something, where the adult is introducing it, giving the instructions, and then the kids are going to play. What we're going to focus on in our training is really some non-directive, because you can do non-directive movement play, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but we're really going to look at these directive therapist initiated sort of movement based games and movement-based play and movement-based interventions that we have a specific therapeutic goal aligned with. And that's what we're going to really kind of focus on. We know that all these types of movement can be beneficial for different things for kids, right? And adults as well, all people. But in our training today, we're really honing in on therapist introduced interventions that involve movement. And we are doing that because we feel like it's going to help with the therapy goal. And so that's what we're going to mainly be talking about. So let's take a little deeper look at the idea of movement in children, the philosophical part of this. So first of all, we really just all probably understand already and know that children are not biologically designed to sit in one place and think critically. I mean, that is just not what their bodies want to do. It's not what their brains want to do. Children like to move, they like to explore through movement, and they like to engage with the world through action and movement. At least many children do. So it makes sense that if we're trying to help kids learn something, if we're trying to help them process through something, that there would be this availability, at least, for movement to be a part of what helps with that. In play therapy specifically, we always want to try to strive for a space that allows for movement expression, either initiated on the child's part or initiated on the therapist's part, but that there is, literally space and acceptance for this in your office and a playroom that you've got created. We definitely know how to stock a playroom with toys and materials, right? We have got a lot of good guides for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're going to use play that incorporates pretend play and different toys and materials or expressive play. But we also don't want to forget about movement play, and that this space should have some literal space for movement as well. We also want to think about having movement toys in the playroom that help promote movement. So again, you may have pretend toys that you're using, you may have art materials, you may have constructive toys like Legos and blocks. But don't forget about, do I have any items or toys in here that actually promote movement play, right? Do I have a bot bag or punching bag? Do I have a balance board? Do I have hula hoops? Do I have a mini trampoline? Do I have some things that also promote different ways to move the body and different types of movement play? I think this varies from child to child, obviously. Some kids may seek out and desire more movement than other kids as a play preference. In alt play therapy, one of the things we talk about is you discover the child's play preferences. When you discover their play preferences, you have found, your outlet. You want to work through their play preferences. You want to make sure that you're introducing interventions that fit their play preferences. This is, a really helpful way to get effective work done toward your therapy goals. And so we want to understand, is the child I'm working with, is their play preference movement play? And then do I even have the ability to support that here in the office or space that I'm working with them in, right? So we can talk later about items that you might consider having in a playroom or a play space. But just think about what promotes movements and what promotes any kind of movement, and having some of those items in your space. So what about research in terms of the benefits of movement. So this is like a really kind of easy thing to talk about because let me start with I think we've known for years and years and years that, you know, physical activity is beneficial for people. We knew this even before we had research on it because we just had people who could say, taking a walk helps me, working out helps me feel better, even before we even had research to support it. People could tell that if they engaged in certain types of physical activity, it helped them in some way, made them feel better in some way, did something beneficial for them. And of course, in present day, we have tons of research that supports all kinds of physical activity or movement as a way to help with a lot of things, but also mental health issues and mental health needs. And it's not, really challenging to dive into that research. There's a lot of it. I put some here in this PowerPoint, but I mean, there's plenty more that you could read and access if you wanted to do that. A lot of research that we have presently kind of hones in and focuses on specific types of movement or physical activity and the gains that we're getting from that or the benefits. So it's a little bit more focused than maybe just, yes, physical fitness, getting out and exercising will help you. It's a little bit more focused on maybe a specific type of exercise, a specific type of program, specifically using yoga or weightlifting or running or walking or some type of specific physical activity. Some of the research that I've highlighted in this handout you've got focuses on whole brain activation movement, midline crossing, because I do a lot of that with kids, especially to work on kids who have dysregulation issues, trauma issues, kids who have anxiety issues, just some of the research that looks at how midline crossing whole brain activation can help with those issues. So I've kind of focused a little bit more on that. But I mean, there's tons that you could dive into if you wanted to look at the benefits. And that helps you in terms of even understanding how this type of play helps move toward accomplishing your therapy goals, especially if you're wanting to explain that to a third party, parents or whoever might be asking. There's quite a bit of evidence that shows improvements in executive functioning skills and needs through different types of movement, exercise programs, movement play that kids engage in. And of course, that's one of the issues too that could be one of the therapy goals that you're working on with some of your kids. And we've got a lot of good research in that area of executive functioning needs, dysregulation, even anxiety reduction for how certain movements, especially I think bilateral stimulation, can help with those therapy goals. So, how can movement look if we're seeing it happen in our therapy sessions, in our time with us? How can it look? It can look a lot of different ways. And again, some of this may be child led, some of it may be therapist led, just kind of depends on what you're doing with the child and kind of what theory maybe you're working out of. So, first of all, we could have like whole body movement where the child is just maybe doing some kind of like jumping around, maybe something like jumping jacks. They're just kind of moving their whole body in some kind of activity. Maybe it's playful, maybe it's purposeful, but there's a lot of body movement going on. We could also have selective movement where the child is really just kind of moving one part of their body. Like maybe we're just throwing a football back and forth to each other and catching it, right? Maybe we're not even hardly moving our feet at all, if we're throwing the ball really well to each other. Yesterday, I had a child come in that I'm working with who came in and went and grabbed this koosh ball and was like, let's play catch. And just they wanted to sit on one chair and I sat on the other. And we sat there for quite some time, just throwing this koosh ball back and forth, um, which was really interesting anyway, because this child not didn't typically do anything like that. So that was kind of interesting. But that was pretty selective movement. We're just sitting there, but we are throwing this koosh ball back and forth. You might see large, small, fast, or slow movement from kids depending on what they're engaging in and doing. Sometimes I see a lot of random movement, and some of that comes from sensory related differences, either proprioceptive, interoceptive, maybe vestibular things going on. Sometimes it's kind of a way maybe that the child is regulating, that they found to regulate is to move their body just in different ways. I have a client who comes in and who is autistic and gifted. She's a young teen now. I've seen her for a couple of years. Lots of dysregulation issues. And she always comes into my office, and I have an exercise ball in my office. Plus, I have like a big fluffy rug, then a more sort of less fluffy carpet. But she is a random mover. I mean, she'll come in, she'll lay down on the floor while she's talking to me. Then she'll like flail her body on the exercise ball for a while she's talking to me. Then she'll move and she'll have her back on the floor and put her legs up on the chair while she's talking to me. Then she's back to the exercise ball in some way. She's a random mover. Like, but we're having like full on focused conversations this whole time that she's doing that. So, and, this is probably a good place to stop and go, all these expressions are okay. I mean, these are things that kids are kind of gravitating toward naturally and finding are working for them in some way, whether it's regulatory or anxiety reducing or whatever it may be, or just sensory seeking. It feels good in some way. I would never like try to stop her from doing that and tell her she needed to get up and sit on the chair and talk to me. I mean, if I even attempted to do that and got her to do it, we would probably have a very different session. She actually probably wouldn't be talking to me like she does as she does the movement that feels good to her and that she needs to do in the office. We can also have like intentional exercise or goal oriented play through an exercise class we're going to, some sports that we're participating in. A lot of kids do tend to participate in some kind of sports, whether it's, dance, gymnastics, baseball, basketball, soccer. I mean, there's a lot of things that kids get put in or they want to go in that is sort of intentional or go oriented movement, right? And then there's just play. Like the child may just be playing, and part of the play involves movement of some kind. And that's something that, in some ways, is really our original form of play. Like if we go back in history, we are going to find a time where there were no manufactured toys. Kids didn't have toys of any kind. There was no toys developed for kids, and kids would go maybe make toys or use items that weren't really toys to do some kind of pretend play or whatever it might be, or make a stick something, make a rock something. And there was oftentimes a lot of movement in kids' play. They would go outside and play some game they made up together, or just run and chase each other and try to climb a tree. There was a lot of movement involved. And that still happens sometimes today, but I really think it's interesting because we talk a lot about play in modern day, and a lot of play is connected to items. It's connected to toys that you can buy in a department store. It's connected to a video game. It's connected to an art supply. And I'm like, there's movement play over here hanging out that actually has been around much longer than any of those things, that has a lot of natural benefits to it that maybe we need to really be supporting more, and making sure this type of play is happening as well in kids' lives. Oops. Okay, so some movement considerations. If you're wanting to do some of the interventions we're going to be talking about, or you're wanting to include more maybe items in your space that promote movement, let's talk about some considerations. The first one being space, the literal space. I travel around and do a lot of trainings in person for clinics, agencies, and I've walked into a lot of offices. I've walked into a lot of playrooms or play spaces, and some of them I've seen, I don't know that you would want much movement happening in this space because there's not much space here. And if the child starts doing much movement, they're going to hit something with their hands or their feet, and it could hurt. It could actually be unsafe. So the first thing you got to consider is, do you have some space for movement? Because you really do have to have that if you're going to start doing movement interventions that really include the whole body, or any kind of moving around of any type, because you want to make sure that the child's not going to fall over something or hit a wall with their fist or something as they're moving things. Just got to have the space for it, and make sure that when you're thinking about a structured maybe intervention to implement, okay, this is a great intervention, but do I have the space to carry this out and do this with the child? Do you need any props? I mentioned a punching bag. I mentioned exercise ball, balance or wobble board. There's sensory tiles. There's lots of props that promote movement that maybe kids will gravitate toward on their own, or you might use in a structured intervention that you're introducing to the child. But you would think about, do I have some things like this already? Or do I need to go get some items? Physical limitations on the part of the child is a big consideration, because I work with a lot of neurodivergent kids. Some of my kids come in and they do have physical limitations. I work with kids who have different fine or large motor issues. I work with kids who have cerebral palsy. I work with kids who access and utilize a wheelchair at times. And sometimes there's just physical limitations where there's a certain play intervention that involves movement, they would not be able to do. And so I'm obviously not going to introduce that kind of intervention to them. And I think it sounds pretty obvious, but sometimes, we just may not be thinking. And then we introduce an intervention and we realize, oh my gosh, the child can't even really grasp this item with their hand. And we just don't want to create a scenario like that for the child, where we introduce this play intervention, we think they're going to like it, think it will be helpful for therapy goals, and then they really can't even do it. So you want to be aware of that with any of the kids that you're working with before you introduce a movement intervention. You also want to think about the age of the child, what's appropriate for their age, right? Um, you would probably do different types of things with a 5-year-old than you would do with a 12-year-old. And you may need different kinds of space. You may need different kinds of props. And that just makes sense. So thinking about the age of the kids that you work with, and do you have kind of appropriate space and items and interventions for their age? Preference and comfort level of the child. This is huge. This is always a starting point, again, for us in all play therapy. What's the play preferences of the child? Do they seem to like, enjoy, and are interested in movement play? Or do they not like any kind of movement play? When we learn about their play preferences, we're going to focus on their play preferences. So obviously, we're focused on movement based play interventions and processes. But if I had a child I was working with who did not like movement, I wouldn't do any of the things that we're going to be talking about in this training. And that's not their play preference. Maybe their play preference is expressive or art related play, or maybe it is constructive play. Then we're going to work out of their play preferences. So we wouldn't be doing movement based play with them. So we are making sure that this is a type of play that the child enjoys doing and is interested in doing. And then, even within that, we're making sure when we introduce some kind of movement intervention that it is in the comfort level of the child. This may require, a regular check in with them and making sure they understand, hey, if we're doing some kind of movement or you have to do some kind of movement in this intervention or this game that you're not comfortable with, just tell me because you don't have to do that. We want to make sure that we are communicating that with our kids for sure. If this type of movement play requires connecting together, like some kind of physical touch between you and them, you always want to make sure you explain that ahead of time and that you get the child's consent and permission. They understand what's going to happen and they can share that they're okay with that or not okay with that. Even if it's just something as simple as there's going to be an element where you're holding hands, right? Then you just want to make sure that this is thoroughly explained and that you're in the comfort level of the child before you move forward and do anything. You also have to be very aware of sensory differences and issues because some kids will have some sensory differences where they will become very uncomfortable, possibly dysregulated in terms of moving their body in a certain way or with certain types of maybe physical touch. And they're not going to like that intervention. It's going to have the opposite effect on them that you're trying to go for. So you would want to know as best as you could if there were any sensory differences or needs with this child. Something you would want to check on ideally in your intake process, and then avoid any movement interventions that could be problematic for those sensory needs or those sensory differences. And then the last one here is safe. Obviously, you always want to be safe. All these can kind of fall under safety, that we're not doing anything that's going to potentially, hurt the child physically or upset them in some way, right? Just making sure that our interventions keep the child safe, keep you safe, keep the space safe. Um, I was working with a 10-year-old boy who came in to see me, who came in with a diagnosis of ADHD, and really cool guy, really personable, friendly, um, pretty talkative little guy, but he definitely gravitated toward movement play. Like he wasn't interested in pretend play. He didn't want to play in a sand tray. He didn't want to build anything with Legos. He wanted to jump around, move around. He wanted to do activity. And so we did a lot of different things under sort of the umbrella of movement, play, and interventions. But one thing that he was always trying to do is he always wanted to set up. I had this basketball door hanging basketball goal in this playroom, and he was always wanting to set up these kind of obstacle course dynamics that led to slamming the basketball in the basketball goal. This was the ultimate thing. And so he would want to set up these things that he had to like jump on, climb on, hop to the next thing, and slam the basketball goal. Sometimes he would try to set up something really elaborate, like he'd try to grab a chair and he was going to run and so for example, he might have set the dollhouse in the floor, then a chair in front of it, then the exercise ball. And he's like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run, jump over the dollhouse, going to jump over the dollhouse, land on the chair, jump off of the chair, onto the exercise ball, bounce up off the exercise ball, and slam the basketball, go. And I'm over here like, no, 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 we are not doing this obstacle course. I'm like, all I see is like broken arm, broken leg, smashing in head into the wall. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's probably going to be bad. And so some of his courses were safety approved, but some of them were like, no, I think we're going to set a limit here. Let's redo this in a way that doesn't feel like it's going to be dangerous. And I'm going to go get your parents and tell them that they need to take you to the hospital. Probably not what they're expecting from play therapy time. He did a lot of this in his life outside of the office. He was regularly coming in with something wrapped around some part of his body that he had sprained, twisted, broke. But I'm like, let's just not contribute to that into the playroom. So you do always want to make sure that you keep things safe. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about hope brain activation. I want to get us through this before we take our break, and then we can come back and use our second half to just focus on interventions. So I won't belabor this a lot. I think we're all pretty familiar with bilateral stimulation, crossing the right and left sides of the brain hemispheres, and lots of movement based things, lots of programs out there that exist that focus on this kind of experience with kids, with teens, with adults. And like I mentioned, we've got some nice research on this as well, and how it can help with things like regulating the system, executive functioning needs, also anxiety reduction. So the goal here in whole brain activation is that when we use both sides of our brain are activated, not just one, and we can activate both sides of our brain through these movements, specifically designed movement approaches with our body, then it produces the ability for us to basically regulate our nervous system better, which includes all those things that I just mentioned, to think more clearly. So we've got top down benefits, and to also calm our nervous system. So we have bottom up benefits. And that's sort of the selling point here, if you will, whole brain activation. I think we pretty much talked about that. So one of the spaces that I kind of focus on this with is kids who come in to see me who are dealing with a lot of dysregulation. That dysregulated system can be coming from a lot of places. It could be coming from sensory issues. It could be coming from fears, anxiety issues, could be coming from trauma experiences. There's a lot of things that could produce a dysregulated child, but their system on a pretty regular seems to be dysregulated. And this is causing, as it typically does, a lot of outward behavior. And then that behavior is what the adults around, are having problems with. They don't like that behavior. This behavior is disruptive. It's not cooperative. It's unsafe. It's whatever it is. And then I get a call or somebody comes in because they want this behavior to not happen anymore. Well, the behavior is just, communication. It's just a symptom. It's just a sign to you that says, well, there's something creating this behavior. And for a lot of kids, it's probably a dysregulated system. So, what is actually dysregulating that system? That's kind of our core target. That's what we want to address if we want a sustainable change. So, it's not always easy to know what that is, but when you do know that you've got a dysregulated child, one of the things you can do is at least start to work on helping regulate their system. So, what regulates them? And different things can regulate children. Again, I kind of look at it like play preferences. Most kids' systems have something that they prefer that regulates them. So they may regulate through traditional relaxation, like deep breathing, guided meditation, things like this. They may regulate through art. They may regulate through free play, pretend play. They may regulate through video games, or they may regulate through body movement. And that's the one we're focusing on in this training. So, a few resources. I've tried to include some different resources in here you can check out more on your own. I mentioned the Brain Gym program. So, that's a great program. You can go purchase their books, their materials. I think they still offer trainings. If you go to YouTube and you type in Brain Gym, I think you'll get a lot of different examples of the exercises being used. So you can learn more about this program, which focuses on midline crossing. And again, these different movement exercises that do that. And we're going to do a couple of these together after our break. I think autism movement therapy is still going. I'm not totally sure. I didn't get a chance to check it right before our training. I know the founder of it died a few years ago, but I think somebody picked it up and kept it going. But obviously, it's focused on autistic kids, and it's kind of a movement dance focused program. Again, a lot of bilateral stimulation components to help with regulation. Learning more about the sensory system of the child, I think, is very helpful with what we're talking about. Are there sensory differences? Are there sensory needs? How would we help with those? Especially, there are ways to help through movement. If you go to this website, sensorysmarts.com, this is created by OT. There is an example of what they call sensory diet there. That's a really good example in their handout section. And there's a lot of just kind of simple, basic day-to-day movement games, activities that you could do to help with different sensory areas, which can also help with regulation goals. That just might be a place for you to get some ideas of some simple movement things that you can do with the kids who come in to see you. Just get more ideas that you can try, right? Creative relaxation is a program I went through several years ago out of Florida, and it is yoga for basically neurodivergent kids. So autistic and other neurodivergent kids, how to utilize yoga methods, practices with this population, considerations, what works best, what can be beneficial. And I thought it was a great program. I still use a lot of what I learned there with some of my clients. So that's another program, book, resources that you can check out if that sounds interesting to you. Maybe something that you're doing in your own free time. So just maybe learning more about how you can integrate that in to your child play therapy work, especially for kids who respond well to it. Then you've got another great movement kind of focused program that you can use. And there's a lot of resources for doing yoga with kids. There's a lot of products on the market. Besides this program, there is a yoga and play therapy book. I wish I had it here with me. Actually, I might. I may try to find it on the break. That some play therapists wrote. And there's a set of cards called Yoga Pretzels, which is like heavy cardstock cards that are focused on kids that you can get. And then I love this book. Um, it's called The Yoga Adventure for Children. It's very playfully based. And I'll give you the author's name here, Helen Hart. This is a great book, and it's a book I found years ago, and it's interesting because I haven't seen it around a lot of places. I'm like, there's just a lot of good ideas here for child and play therapists. But again, it's called Yoga Adventure for Children. Just another good resource along those lines. And I'll try to find the yoga and play therapy book. I'm pretty sure I have it here in my home office. So when we take our break, I will look for it. So I want to share with you guys a couple of case examples so you can see some different ways that movement can look in our session times. So this first one is Ben, and I'm going to give you a young child and I'm going to give you a teen example. So Ben was actually like, I think 12 when he came in to see me, 12 or 13. And he had had a previous diagnosis of autism when he was little, pretty low support needs. I mean, you probably would not really recognize Ben as autistic. Most of his need areas that I discovered in therapy were around just kind of emotion awareness and expression. He also had a lot of anxiety issues, especially some social anxiety issues. His parents brought him in because they wanted him to work on quote unquote social skills. They didn't think he was social enough. Um, and I'm like, so part of my work was with the parents, like, well, he, we don't really need to work on that. He actually knows how things work socially. He's not lacking a skill. He's not a super social guy. He doesn't want to be. He's not interested in being. And then some of the spaces he goes into that are social do produce anxiety for him. So we want to target that anxiety more than anything. So that was kind of our primary therapy goal. And but Ben had a hard time talking. Like he didn't like to really talk, but he also didn't like to play. So he likes to just kind of sit in my office and wait for me to come up with something for us to do. So I'm like, well, I can come up with lots of things to do, but I don't know that that's really what our therapy needs to look like. I need more Ben in this therapy, not Dr. Grant dictating everything. And so I just started experimenting with things to see if we could find like what kind of spoke to him. And so I had no idea this was coming, but the place we finally landed, which was wonderful, we had like a private area in the back of our clinic. So we went out there during his sessions and we would throw a football back and forth. And he would talk and talk and talk and talk and talk about everything while we were throwing that football back and forth. Like he would talk about his school and some of the peer anxieties and tap into some emotion discussion. It became like our most productive session times were when we were just tossing this football back and forth and chatting. And it was just the addition of that movement process with something that probably felt good to him, that really was able to put him in this place where, we got more of Ben in the session and just what he thought. And that was really helpful because then I could help him communicate that back to his parents. And we got in some really nice family understandings and acceptance. There was some nice affirming work that happened there with the whole family. And our session times ended with full on graduation therapy goal accomplishment, which was really nice. Case example. Another case example I will share with you was a little girl and her mom that came in to see me. Lots of dysregulation issues. She was around 7, I think, 6 or 7. Struggle with school, was currently being homeschooled because the public school was tried, but it was just really pretty disastrous for a lot of different reasons. And this little girl, by the way, was autistic, also gifted. And so our primary therapy goal really focused around helping with these dysregulation issues, trying to get regulation into her system. Mom was pretty on top of things. She was pretty up on understanding dysregulation, autism, affirming practices. I mean, she just came in kind of knowing a lot of things, which was really helpful. So I didn't have to spend a lot of time doing much parent training or psycho ed with her. So this little girl, though, really responded to movement. I mean, again, she wasn't much of a pretend player. She didn't really like art, but she liked to move. She liked to play games that move. She liked to pull nude sword battle her mom and me. She liked to punch the punching bag. She liked to do anything that kind of involved moving her body a lot. And one of the games we played and I introduced to them for regulation goals is this game called From Head to Toe. And I have this game in your handout. Later on in the interventions, and I'll show it to you. But basically, it's a card stock game where you draw a card and there's a movement on it. Like, can you wave your hands in the air? Can you kick your feet in the air? Can you bend down and touch your toes with your fingers? There's just a lot of different movements, one on each card. And you take turns drawing a card. So I would draw first. We would all do this movement. Then she would go and she would draw a card. And then we would do these moves in sequence. So we would all do my movement again, and then we would do the new movement she drew. Then her mom would draw a card. We do my movement again, the child's card, and then now the mom's card that has a new movement. And we keep adding to the sequence, and we keep always going back and doing the full sequence every time a new card is drawn. And usually we'd get up to around 10 or 12 sequence before we'd stop playing that game and do something else. But this was really great for her for regulation. We did it in sessions a lot. They got the game and would play it at home as well, which became just kind of a nice tool intervention that was repeated. for helping with our therapy goal. So just two different ways that you could see, and both these ways, of course, were more directed by me to some extent. The first one with Ben, I was just trying things to see if there was something he would like until we landed on something that seemed to connect really well. The second one, I knew about that game. I thought it would be a good intervention for them, and I introduced it. There can be non-directive, non-child led sort of movement things that you learn about that become a part of the therapy process, especially if you're doing some type of child led or non-directive play. In those cases, you really want to make sure that you have toys and materials in your office setting that promote movement, because if there's nothing there that promotes movement, if there's no space to move, then obviously the child's not going to probably be able to do that play preference and go to that and show you that that's what they want to do. Okay, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I just put in here some book references for specific play therapy theories and approaches, like Adlerian play therapy, TheraPlay. You may have heard of some of these, maybe not. Ecosystemic, all play therapy. All these play therapy theories and approaches are more directive, the ones I'm sharing here, and definitely promote and access movement play. And so if you were maybe introducing some movement interventions, you could potentially be working out of any of these approaches or frameworks as you're doing that movement based play. Again, like I've mentioned a couple times, you can have non-directive play that has movement in it. That would just be child led and child initiated, and then you would just support that. So that can occur as well. And they could be working out of child centered play therapy or some other non-directive approach. Some of the toys that promote movement, I think I mentioned a lot of these already. You just got a list here. Some things may be too big for your space, understandably, but just think about what you can access and have in your room for kids who need more movement based play. Oops. Okay. So when we come back from our break, let's just try to stay around 5 minutes and take a quick break. But when we come back from our break, we're just going to dive into several of these interventions and talk about them and do some of them together. So I will see you all back in at about 5 minutes. All right, everyone, let's come back together. Let's make our way back to our screens so we can carry on. I do want to ask real quickly if there were any questions that have come up so far. If so, you can type them in the chat or you can unmute and ask. I did not see any in the chat so far, but if anybody has anything, you can definitely let me know at this point. Okay, Celine asked about some examples of whole brain activation activities, and we're going to do those next. I'll talk about that when we go through a lot of these interventions because several of them are midline crossing whole brain interventions. Okay, I think we're going to jump in then, and we're going to do some of these together, and also I'll just explain some of them. I want you to leave with a lot of intervention ideas. So I want to make sure we can get through everything that's here on our handout so you have them to try with some of the kids that you are working with. So I broke them down into some categories purely for organizational standpoint, like regulation, connection, etc. But you will see that a lot of these interventions overlap for different therapy goals, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go through here. Like you could use them for connection and regulation, maybe also executive functioning needs. There's multiple benefits. So don't get too hung up on the categories that I've put them in. So let's start with the lazy eights. This comes from Brain Gym. So we're going to do this together. So I'm going to stop my share screen so we can see each other better. So they call it lazy eights, and it's a midline crossing move. So this is a whole brain activation move. We would probably understand it better now as an infinity symbol, and so would our kids. So we're going to get our body in a specific movement, and then we're going to do our lazy eights. So reach your hands out, and you're going to cross them over, hook them together. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pretend like we're tracing in the air an infinity symbol or a sideways eight. And it's just kind of nice and easy at whatever rhythm the child wants to do this in. Doesn't have to be fast or slow. And we're just going to trace for a while. And then we're going to pause. And then we're going to go the opposite direction from what we were doing. It's just usually a little bit more challenging. But your body position right now is in a midline crossing position. The way that we have crossed over our hands and our arms and locked them is a midline crossing position. Okay, so you can stop with that. And when I'm doing this with kids or with their parents, what I do is try to do a partner version. So we'll start doing the individual version like we just did. And then, as long as it's okay with the kids, we will open up our hands like this and reach out, and we will grab each other's hands. So we're linked together, and then we will trace in the air together as a partner, holding each other's hands. Same thing, and then go reverse again. So just a nice way, I gotta shake my arms out from that. Just a nice way to get simple midline crossing game that you can do in kind of a mirroring version or as a partner version. In the Brain Gym book, they highlight a way of doing this on paper. So you may have seen that done before where they have you start by just tracing a sideways 8 on a piece of paper, which is usually very easy for most people. Then taking a second piece of paper and tracing a sideways 8 with your non-dominant hand and just doing that for a little while. And then you get a third piece of paper and a clean piece of paper, and you put some kind of marker, pen in both hands. And now the midline crossing objective, that was just a warm up, is to trace with both hands simultaneously on that paper without your hands hitting or without just following one hand. They have to be at kind of opposite points on the paper at the same time and getting that tracing motion down. That's one of the ways that they introduce it in the Brain Gym book. So you've got different ways that you can do this lazy eights exercise. I like the bigger movement one and the partner one, but you could actually do all the versions with a child if you wanted to. And if you go to even just like Amazon, type in Brain Gym, there's two books. There's a little orange book and there's a white book that says Teacher's Edition. And the books have all the exercises in them. The white book that says Teacher's Edition probably has more detail and more information. So if you were picking between one or the other, it's probably a better one to get. Okay, WRJMD, very simple movement intervention. So these stand for walk, run, jump, move, and dance. So what we're going to do is first have the child select music. So we can pull it up on our phone. If you have a computer, a smart TV, whatever you use, always ask the child to kind of give me a favorite music, song, something they like, and then we're going to play that while we do this game. So we're going to start when the music starts by just walking around the room, however we want to walk. And we're going to walk for, maybe half a minute. You can kind of get a feel for that based on the child's attention level, how long you want to stay in each one of these movements. But when you're ready to move out of walk, then you're going to announce, okay, now we're going to run. And we run around the room, however we want to run, again, for however long you want that to go. Probably not as long as the walk. And then we switch to jump. So you would announce, now it's time to jump. And we jump around the room in whatever style of jump that we want to do. Can be big jumps, can be little bunny hops, however we want that to look. The child can do whatever they want. You can do what you want. And then we get to M, it's move around the room in any unique way you want to do it. So it's kind of like free creation. So however you want to move around the room, you decide and pick your style. And then when we're done with that, we switch to dance. Okay, we're going to finish off our song by dancing however you want to dance around the room. You could mix up this acronym, of course, and do these in a different order or add some other things in here. It's really just a playful way to get that movement happening and to keep it going because we switch it up. We don't get too bored with just doing the same movement before we switch it up. And it's always nice to have the element in there of letting the child choose like some music they like or a favorite song that they like. So I mentioned the head to toe game and how it works. I think you can find that online if you want to purchase it. I did pull up another option for this that I want to show you. It is also available in book form. So this is the book version where you just go through the book and read the pages, and then you can do the move. So it's not quite the same implementation as the game, but if you wanted to just get the book, you could. And each page has a move that then you could do together as you're reading through the book. I like the game a little bit better, but if you can't find the game, you could always get the book. And it's pretty much the same moves, just in game version or book version. So backwards moves, think about the walk, run, jump, move, dance acronym. Think about that intervention, only everything is done backwards. So we explain to the child, we're going to do a bunch of different moves together around the room, but all of them have to be done backwards. So I usually start with walking because it's usually the easiest. Let's just walk around the room backwards. And you want to make sure, again, of course, you have space to do this and tell the child to be sure and not pay attention to what's around them and not trip over anything. But we start by walking backwards. And after we've done that for a little bit, I usually switch to hopping backwards, hopping or jumping. And we'll do that for a little bit. And then I usually switch to swimming backwards. So we'll just kind of make our swim stroke backwards, our backstroke as we walk around the room. And then I usually switch to move around the room backwards in slow motion. So we'll slow it down a little bit. And they can just kind of move however they like, but in slow motion. And then I'll go to dance. Okay, whatever dance you want to do, but we have to dance it backwards style. And I usually end on, you can have as many moves as you want in here. I always end on crawling backwards, and we do the crab crawl because the crab crawl is a really good whole brain activation intervention, midline crossing move. So that's a good one to end on. And you can keep crawling backwards until you're done and you can't crawl anymore. And then you can end the intervention. Animal moves is kind of a combination of sort of an emotion identification, expression, intervention, but can also help sometimes with regulation as well. So the way we play it is we're going to take turns, us and the child. It's always good if you go first, just to kind of model what we're doing in the game. And you're going to name an animal and a feeling. And then both you and the child have to act like that animal having that feeling. What do we think this animal would act like if they were experiencing this feeling? So, for example, you might say, okay, we've got a sad bear. So now we both have to try to figure out how we would act as a sad bear and start acting that way. And then once we're done, the child gets to choose. They get to name the animal and the feeling. And then we will try to act that, both of us will try to act that out. This is one of those games where we kind of just keep playing until the child really seems like they're not interested in playing anymore. And then we'll move on to something else. So another game where you've got a good example of a game where we've got a couple of potential benefits here for why you might be using it with the child. Okay, this finger tracing game, let's do this together. I came up with this when the pandemic hit, and so many of my clients went to telehealth. And I wanted to keep working with them and, of course, trying to address our therapy goals. So I came up with this as a really good intervention, especially to help work on like connection, engagement, um, attachment. I mean, it just felt like there could be a lot of potential benefits here, and we could do this through telehealth, which would be really nice. And so I'm going to do this. We're going to do this together. So the basic way you play this is I'm going to put my finger up on the screen and I'm going to trace around and you guys are going to follow me. Okay. So you're basically going to do what I do and try to stay with me on the screen. Okay. So we'll get started here. We'll go nice and easy. So far, so good. Those of you I could see anyway. Good job, everyone. But we're going to make it a little bit more exciting. So we're going to add two fingers. Okay. That one finger was pretty easy. Nice job, everyone. Okay, good job, everybody. Nice job. You can do all kinds of moves that you want to do on here. Really, just a pretty simple game you can activate through telehealth. You could do it in person, but there's probably better things you could do in person. But it works really well if you're still doing telehealth with any kids. I actually started getting kids during the pandemic as new clients who were coming in as telehealth. So a lot of the kids who switched when the pandemic hit in a really big way were all, seeing me in person. So I already had this relationship built with them. I knew who they were. Then I started getting clients who came in that I never met in person. We were starting as telehealth. And so it was really important to have some connecting games that we could do right away to try and build that relationship and build connection through the screen. And, if you're really clever, you can twist your fingers in a lot of ways that would activate the whole brain. And you could use this for regulation work as well. Okay, let me pull my screen back up. Okay, if we have time, I will show you these video clips, just some different movement interventions I'm doing with the child in a video clip. But I think I'll save it to the end or closer to the end because I want to make sure I get through all of these that I have listed. And all these clips are on the public All Play YouTube channel. So you can always go there and watch them and more if we don't get to them today. So some executive functioning, maybe focused interventions. Again, remember the headings aren't set in stone. I mean, a lot of these interventions have crossover for different therapy goals. One of my favorites, which is just a classic, is Simon Says for executive functioning. It's such a great executive functioning game to play with kids, to really kind of work on strengthening that listening and focusing and trying to do more than one thing at the time kind of process in executive functioning while playing just a game that a lot of kids like to play and they find really enjoyable. So I think we all know how to do this, but let's give it a try just in case we don't remember. And then I'll also show you this cross crawl activity that comes from Brain Gym. I'm really bad at Simon Says, so you guys will do well with me playing this game because I can never get anybody out. So I'll start, and you know that Simon Says, classic game, I just call out things for you to do, and then you do them. But I have to say Simon Says, right, first. If I don't and you do it, then you're out, right? We know how that works. So we'll just do a quick little version here. So Simon Says, put your right hand on your head. Simon Says, put your left hand on your head. Simon Says, take both hands and put them in front of your face. Simon Says, put your right hand behind your head and your left hand behind your head. Oh, I didn't say Simon Says. That's the first time I've actually ever gotten anybody out on this game. I've been practicing. I'm like, I gotta get a good thing down that actually gets somebody out because I can never get anyone out. Okay, you can put all your hands down. Oh, I didn't say Simon Says. I'm on a winning streak. We're just gonna keep playing this the rest of the training now. So easy, simple game. Simon Says you can put all your hands down and quit playing the game. Easy game to play with kids, right? And you can start, then after just a period of time, switch, let them be the lead, switch back, and you be the lead. Just keep taking turns, going back and forth. Really, I think most kids would be engaged by it for a while. And again, it's one of those games that you can keep playing until they're really not interested in playing anymore. And then you can kind of move on to something else. So I want to show you this cross crawl exercise. Again, another one that comes from Brain Gym. So really good for sort of anxiety reduction, also regulation. I know you probably work with kids who struggle with those issues. So these are some, again, high movement based games, but if the child likes movement, then it's something that they would probably like a lot. I have to stand up, so I'm going to move around here a little bit in my space. You can do this with me. You just need a little bit of space and you will need to stand to do this. Otherwise, won't work very well. So the cross crawl is basically what I think of as like an old aerobics video move. It's pretty much the same thing. They call it a cross crawl, but you've probably seen this before or done it in some exercise class. So you basically take your right elbow and you cross it over to your opposite knee. And then you just alternate back and forth. So pretty much like an old exercise class move, right? And then you just kind of keep doing this for a little while. And then you can put some variation in it. You can do like hand slaps, switch in, make it a little bit more fun and playful, and just slap your opposite knee. And then I like to even take it down to the feet. So slap your opposite foot. You can do that next. Kids like the feet one, I think, a lot. And then you can even try going behind your back. So see if you can slap your opposite foot behind your back. And then you can stop. We've done enough exercise for today. So that's called the cross crawl and brain gym. One of the things that's nice about the movement interventions is that some of them are pretty simple and can be done pretty quickly. And you don't need any specific kind of space or room. Doesn't have to be a playroom to be able to do some of these. And some are more involved, right? And may involve more props or more space that's needed. But you've got a variety. So you can try to find things that are going to work for your setup. Balance beam tape is where we take like some painter's tape and we take two strips that are maybe about 5 feet long and we place them on the floor. Just put the tape down on your floor. And you want basically a lane. No, actually, I'm going to give you two variations of this. So the first one, just take one piece of painter's tape, about 5 feet, and place it on the floor. And this becomes your faux balance beam, right? So we can now use this piece of tape to do all kinds of things on it. So the objective is going to be to walk down the tape, turn around, and come back, but stay on the tape. And you can start off with just walking, like just place one foot in front of the other, walk down the tape, turn around, and come back, but try to stay on the tape. Then you can start adding elements to this. You could do hop on one foot down the tape and come back. Then you could add walk backwards down the tape. You could add walk backwards down the tape while you're holding a ball on top of your head. You just start adding elements to this. And it is kind of fun to do this with the child. So you could put another piece of tape down that's for you. And then you're doing the same thing the child's doing the same time they're doing it. That can be, I think, sometimes more engaging and more fun for the child if you're participating as well. Or if you have a parent in there with you and you want them to do it as well. I don't think I have this in here, so I'll mention it real quick. The other thing you can do, and what I started explaining was you can make a little lane. So you could have two pieces of tape about 5 feet long and make yourself about just a 6-inch lane between the tape. And you can do the same kind of idea. Like we're going to do things back and forth down the lane, but you have to stay in the lane. So I usually do things like kick a ball down the lane and kick it back, but the ball has to stay in the lane, or walk down the lane while you're hitting a balloon in the air and turn around and come back. So same kind of idea, but you're just working off of sort of a slightly different construction. Okay, follow the leader explorer is basically a intervention I created to really try to address some different sensory needs through body movement, whether it might be some proprioceptive or interoceptive or even vestibular. And also, I think there's just other nice movement benefits here because you can make this whatever you want it to be, because it's basically a guided story. So you may want to write this down before the child comes in. If you don't feel comfortable making it up in the moment, you might want to write it down. But you're basically going to lead the child through an adventure. And the adventure is going to involve obviously a lot of body movement. So one that I do often is we have we are on a boat and this little boat is sinking. So we've got to jump off of it and swim over to the island that's really close to us. So we start doing the movements. So, okay, we got to jump out of the boat. Let's pretend like we're jumping out of a boat and we'll do that movement in the room. And now we got to swim over to the beach. So we'll do the swimming movement. We get to the beach, we get up on the beach. Oh, our hands feel so worn out. It's good to be here. But this beach sand is really hot. And so we just run across it really quick and get to the shade. So we're running on our tippy toes really quickly across to get to the shade on the island. It looks like there may be like a resort or something on the other side of the island. So we need to get there so we can rest and eat and rescue, done with this. So we got to start walking through this island brush and it's really heavy. So we got to push this brush away. We got to push these vines away and these tree limbs. We got to bend down underneath one that's hanging really low. So we're taking the child on a journey here. And then we're doing the movements with the journey. And then we get to a point where we're in some thick mud and it's really hard to pull our feet up. So we got to use a lot of heavy pulling of our legs to get through this thick mud. Then we got to climb up over a rock to get to the other side so we can get to the resort. So you're plotting out your journey here that involves these different movements. And then as you go through this, you're telling it like the story that you and the child are on together and doing this together until you get to your final destination. So I've done enough of these. I just kind of do it in the moment off the top of my head. But if you're just getting started, you might again want to write out what the journey looks like and the different elements you want in there to experience. And then we get to the end. It's a lot of congratulations. We did it. And then I always ask the child if they want to make up a story and they can be the leader and we'll go through their story. And some kids do and some don't, and that's okay. But I always give them the option if they want to do that. Breakout is a game where I use crepe paper. You just need some kind of soft paper like that. And this actually is demonstrated on the Alt Play YouTube channel as well in a video there. But we basically take some crepe paper and we always explain to the child what we're going to be doing first and make sure they're comfortable with it. But we wrap some of the crepe paper around a part of their body. So it could be like around their shoulders at the top. It could be around their hands. It could be around their ankles. It could be some weird position you make that you wrap around. Doesn't matter. You're just wrapping up some part of their body. Not that much. Crepe paper is pretty thin. So you don't have to use a lot of it, but wrap it around a few times. And then you tell them that you're going to count them down. 3, 2, 1, break out. And then they bust out of their wrapping. And so I do this kind of for a lot of different things. Certainly some sensory processing work. Also, I like to do it with some of my executive functioning needs kids. I like to do it for kids who maybe have some impulse control because for them especially, I'll do a really slow countdown. And they're just like, I'm ready to break out. I'm ready to break out. And I'll be like, 3, 2, I'll go really slow. And then I'll be like, break out. And they'll just bust out and they love it. So you can repeat um, doing different body parts. They can do this on you. You can kind of take turns back and forth. Pretty fun intervention. Um, explain it at the beginning. If kids are okay with it, then most kids like enjoy it. And Play-Doh Brain is an intervention where we use Play-Doh, obviously. You could probably also use clay with this if you had clay. Basically, we give the child an item to make, something that is not too difficult, but also not too easy. So you could do like a house, maybe out of Play-Doh or something like that. And you tell them that they have to make it in a very special way. So they've got their Play-Doh, they've got their item they're going to make, but to start with, they can only use one hand and they can use their dominant hand. And they're going to get about 30 seconds to kind of work on building this house with their one hand. When that 30 seconds is up, they're going to switch hands and they can only use their other hand. And they're going to have about 30 seconds to work on the house with that hand. And then after that 30 seconds is up, they're going to switch back to their right hand again, then their left. We're just switching that back a couple of times, 30 seconds each. And then after we've done that a couple of times, we go to, okay, now you've got 30 seconds, but you can only use one finger on your right hand to work on your option. Now we switch, you can only use one finger on your left hand. And we mix that up a little bit. So you're switching back and forth, you're timing it, but it doesn't have to last very long. And then finally, when you kind of get to the end, the child just gets to use both hands however they like, just to finish building their creation however they want to build it. So at the end, they can be free to do what they want. But we want to spend a little bit of time in the beginning, kind of switching back and forth, making it a little bit more purposeful and kind of our challenge. Okay, let me get through these connection ones and then I think we'll have time to watch one of the videos as well. So patty cake categories is where we play the game of patty cake, another great midline crossing whole brain activation game that kids have played for decades. And a lot of hand clapping games where you alternate have a whole brain activation component to them. But patty cake does that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add an element to this. So when you play patty cake, if you don't know how, you just clap your hands and then smack the other person's hands and you alternate back and forth like this in a rhythm. Really simple to play. And then what we do in patty cake categories is we add an element here. And the element we add is you have to be naming off things from a pre-chosen subject while you're in your rhythm. So let's say we chose like farm animals. Then we would be like cow. Then the child would say something. Horse. Then the child would say something. Chicken. Then the child would say something. Duck. We have to be going back and forth in that rhythm and naming things in that rhythm. If we mess up, if we can't think of something, if we repeat ourselves, then we just start over and we can choose a new topic. Great game to play. Really encourage you adding this in. I have it in the connection category. It also is a whole brain activation intervention. I think it's good for executive functioning. There's just a lot of benefits from a very simple game here that you could be targeting in terms of therapy goals. And it's fun. And you can keep coming up with new categories. The child can come up with the categories. And again, you could be in any space and play this game. You don't have to be in a furnished playroom to play this game. Fun ways to cross the screen is another one of these interventions that I put together during the pandemic for telehealth. I adapted it from a TheraPlay game. There's a TheraPlay game that's the fun ways to cross the room. where you just come up with some really weird or silly way to cross the room, and you take turns, you and the child, doing that. And we do this, but we do it on screen. So it's basically like you leave screen, you take turns one at a time. So, like if you went first, you'd leave the screen, and then you'd move across the screen in some weird or silly way. And then you come back, and the child gets a turn at crossing the screen in a fun way. And you just kind of keep going back and forth, coming up with different ideas until, again, the child's not really interested in playing. Another really good game to play in the beginning of telehealth for just some relationship building and connecting with the child. And the last one here, Act Like a Rag Doll, I created from watching my son play this video game. He was really into Roblox when he was younger. And there were all these ragdoll games on Roblox where basically you just go into this game and you could just push these different buttons and you'd fall to the ground and flop around like a rag doll. And he loved these games. And I'm like, I feel like I could have invented this game. There's absolutely nothing to it except walking around and then every once in a while pushing a button and you fall down and flop around like a rag doll. I'm like, this is hilarious. And it was so popular, may still be popular. There were tons of games on Roblox like this. So I'm like, what if we just did this in real life? This would be kind of cool, especially for the kids who are familiar with this game. So we just kind of adapted it to in person in the playroom. Same idea. We're going to just, and I usually get some kind of noisemaker device. I do have like a button that makes noise, or we could ring a bell or something. And we both have something that makes noise, like in this way. So we're just going to start by walking around the room. We can play with whatever we want to play with. We can start making something. But if somebody rings their bell or pushes their button, then we both have to fall to the floor and flop around like a rag doll. And we have to do that for like 5 seconds. Then we can get back up and we can go back to doing whatever we were doing. But then the next time somebody rings their bell or makes their noise, we have to flop down wherever we're at and act like a rag doll again for like 5 seconds and then get back up. Great game, especially if kids are familiar with the concept. They will get the biggest kick out of playing this game with you because they've played it, on a video game version or format. Okay, I wanted to make sure I got through all of those and explained them to you. Obviously, we don't want to discount movement games in digital play. If you do any kind of digital or technology play, there are a lot of games that do midline crossing moves, that do whole brain activation, especially some of the Wii games, especially some of the games on virtual reality. So that's another avenue for getting movement play in through like a digital or technology play format. Does anybody have any questions? Because we're getting close to the end. So if you have any questions, please type them in. I am going to see, while I'm waiting for your questions, if I can pull up one of these clips for us. You can type your question in the chat, or you can just unmute and ask.
I didn't have a question necessarily. I just wanted to share, I do very specific trauma work with like survivors of assault, domestic violence, things like that, human trafficking. And I also just work with trauma in general, and I do a lot of play therapy with adults. And so I was very grateful to learn some of these interventions because I have adults that I am helping them desensitize trauma histories that are very complex. And they can't do like the calm, safe space, or they can't do guided meditation, or they can't do imagery because their bodies don't feel safe sitting. And so I have some tactile grounding skills, but this was so great. Like this one, I'm so excited to teach it to several of my adult clients because so I just wanted to share that like while I'm definitely going to use this with the child clients I work with, because I work with very young children too, I just really appreciate and I use a lot of play therapy with adults also. And so I just like to share that with people because sometimes I think people get nervous to use these type of interventions with outside of children or like teenagers. So I very much appreciate your work.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that and adding that too, because for sure, I mean, we talk a lot about kids and maybe even teens and focus on them a lot, but you can use, quote unquote play interventions or ideas with adult clients as well. And sometimes it's very powerful to use with adult clients. So thanks for adding that in and sharing that for sure.
Thank you.
I know we had a question. Kaylin asked, are there any scripts or tips you have for responding and or informing parents when kids get minor injuries in sessions, rug burns, falls, especially with kids with coordination issues, health issues, struggle with interoception, etc. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is to try to be proactive in saying to parents, like we have a little sheet that we have as part of the intake that does talk about, when we do use different types of play. So your child might be like jumping, rolling on the floor, moving. They might be painting, they might be coloring. So just understand that they might get something on their clothes or they might scrape a knee or something. We're going to make sure that we try to keep things as safe as possible, but we want you to know this could happen. First of all, be proactive, like have something like you say like that at the beginning. So the parents have heard it before anything actually happens, because then at least you can come back and when something happens, come out and say, oh, we were doing this jump around thing and they scraped their knee, but we bandaged it up here, but make sure when you get home, take a look at it and make sure it's okay. At least they know then, oh yeah, they have heard this before that this could happen. We might do that kind of play. Sometimes kids just have an accident. Like you're not even doing any movement-based play. They just like trip on a rug and hit their head on a table or something, like things like that do happen sometimes, or even just accidents. You weren't even doing any specific intervention. I think it's just basically explaining, what happened and going and getting the parent if you need to in the moment or bandaging it up. Not too many things happen, but sometimes, a child might like just run into something or hit something and hurt their arm. And I always make sure I tell parents if anything like that happened. Even if the child's doing fine by the end of the session, I would still inform parents that it happened. Which activity do you recommend for kids with ADHD? I think like any of the in the section that was called attention and focus interventions, which really covers executive functioning, or anything that I mentioned when I said executive functioning maybe needs, you could use with kids with ADHD if they had, executive functioning struggles that you thought that intervention would work with or be helpful for. Um, it's one of those things in, like neurodiversity affirming care, when we have an ADHD or kid or an autistic child, we're always looking at, okay, I mean, this helps us in terms of understanding who they are. and kind of identity things, but what are they really struggling with that brings them here to see me, right? And what are those mental health needs? So, your ADHD child could be struggling with self-worth issues. You could be struggling with anxiety. And so that's what you're going to target, to try to help them. Good questions, everyone. Well, I will tell you that I didn't get to show you the videos, but they're all there on the Alt Play Therapy YouTube channel if you want to watch them. The ones I had in your handout, plus a lot of others, if you want to see some demos of some more interventions. So I know we're out of time, so I just want to thank Sadie again for reaching out and coordinating all this with me and Michael and your whole team, and all you guys who showed up to add some tools to your toolbox, hopefully, in the work that you do with kids. And I will wish you well. And with that, just kind of say goodbye. And don't forget to fill out that training eval, and you will get your post exam and fill that out so we can get you your certificate. I'll turn it back over to Sadie.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Grant, for coming and doing the symposium with us. And I will be reaching out to everyone individually through email. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me as well. I'll drop it in the chat. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. It was great. Thank you.